The sun beat down on Redemption Gulch, baking the dusty main street to a crisp. Buildings, mostly made of sun-baked brick and weathered wood, stood shoulder to shoulder, casting long, narrow shadows that offered little relief from the relentless heat. A lone tumbleweed bounced lazily across the street, a testament to the dry, unforgiving landscape. Redemption Gulch was a town built on hope and hard work, a place where folks came to carve out a new life, to find redemption from past mistakes, or simply to escape the troubles they left behind. The townsfolk were a mix of weathered cowboys, hard-working farmers, hopeful merchants, and weary travelers. They were a God-fearing community, their lives centered around the church at the edge of town. Every Sunday, the townsfolk filled the pews, their voices rising in hymns of praise and supplication. Into this close-knit, somewhat isolated community rode Pastor Elijah. He was young, barely past 30, with kind eyes, a ready smile, and an undeniable charisma. He had been sent by the church elders in the East to breathe new life into the dwindling congregation of Redemption Gulch. Elijah was different from the previous pastors, who were often stern and unyielding. He spoke of love, forgiveness, and understanding, his sermons resonating with the hearts of the townsfolk. He quickly became a beloved figure, a beacon of hope in their often difficult lives. He was exactly what Redemption Gulch needed, or so they thought. He had a secret, one that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their community. He also had a secret that would soon be brought to light by his own actions. Among the townsfolk was Sarah, a woman as radiant as the desert sunrise, yet carrying a hidden sorrow as deep as the canyon surrounding Redemption Gulch. She possessed a beauty that turned heads, with long, flowing auburn hair, eyes the color of the summer sky, and a smile that could melt even the coldest heart. But behind that captivating facade lay a past she desperately tried to outrun. Sarah was known throughout Redemption Gulch for her angelic voice. Every Sunday, she led the church choir, her melodies filling the small wooden building with a sense of peace and hope. Her voice was so pure, so full of emotion, that it often brought tears to the eyes of the congregation. Many believe she was touched by God, blessed with a gift to uplift and inspire. However, Sarah's life wasn't always filled with song and praise. Years ago, before she arrived in Redemption Gulch, she suffered a terrible trauma, a dark secret that haunted her dreams and cast a shadow over her waking hours. She had come to Redemption Gulch seeking solace, a place to heal and rebuild her shattered life. The church became her sanctuary, the community her support system. She found comfort in the familiar hymns and the friendly faces of her fellow parishioners. But the pain lingered, a constant reminder of the past she couldn't escape. She carried this burden silently, masking her inner turmoil with a gentle smile and unwavering faith. Little did she know, the arrival of Pastor Elijah would both complicate and perhaps, eventually, heal her wounded heart. His presence would stir emotions she thought long buried, and force her to confront the demons she had tried so hard to suppress. It wasn't long before Pastor Elijah noticed Sarah's quiet suffering. He saw the pain hidden behind her radiant smile, the sadness that lingered in her eyes even as she sang her heart out. As the new pastor, he felt it was his duty to reach out to those in need, and Sarah, with her obvious inner turmoil, became a focus of his pastoral care. He began by offering her simple words of encouragement after church services, praising her singing and offering a listening ear. Sarah, initially hesitant, found herself drawn to Elijah's genuine concern and gentle demeanor. She started confiding in him, sharing snippets of her past, carefully omitting the most painful details. Elijah, in turn, shared his own vulnerabilities, his struggles with faith, and the weight of responsibility that came with being a pastor. They found solace in their shared burdens, a connection that deepened with each conversation. Their talks moved from the church to the porch of Sarah's small cottage, where they would sit for hours, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple. As they grew closer, their conversations became more intimate, their touches more lingering. A spark ignited between them, a forbidden desire that threatened to consume them both. They knew their feelings were wrong, that a pastor and a parishioner should not harbor such affections. But the pull was too strong to resist. One warm summer night, under the watchful gaze of the desert moon, their secret desires spilled over. A kiss, a touch, a moment of weakness that would forever alter the course of their lives. Their affair began, fueled by passion and guilt, hidden from the judgmental eyes of Redemption Gulch, a secret that would eventually shatter the fragile peace of their community. The consequences of their actions soon became undeniable. Sarah, her usual vibrant self, began to experience morning sickness and a noticeable change in her figure. Panic set in as she realized she was carrying Elijah's child. Fear gripped her heart. Fear of judgment, fear of scandal, and fear of the unknown. With trembling hands, she confided in Elijah, her voice barely above a whisper as she shared the news. Elijah, initially stunned, tried to reassure her, holding her close and promising to protect her and their child. But beneath his comforting words, Sarah sensed a deep-seated fear, a concern for his own reputation and standing within the community. He insisted they keep the pregnancy a secret, at least for a while. He argued that revealing their affair would not only ruin him, but also bring shame and disgrace upon Sarah and their unborn child. He promised to find a way to support them, to provide for their needs discreetly, without raising suspicion. Sarah, torn between her desire for honesty and her love for Elijah, reluctantly agreed. She understood the potential repercussions of their actions and didn't want to jeopardize Elijah's position or expose their child to the scorn of the town. They devised a plan, a web of lies and half-truths designed to conceal their secret. Elijah would continue to serve as pastor, maintaining his image of piety and integrity, while Sarah would navigate her pregnancy in secrecy, relying on Elijah's clandestine support. Their secret, however, became a heavy burden, a constant weight on their hearts, threatening to crush them under its immense pressure. The guilt and the fear of exposure gnawed at them, poisoning their once joyful moments together. The fragile peace of Redemption Gulch was about to be shattered. Months crawled by, each day a torturous test of their carefully constructed facade. Sarah, growing bigger with each passing week, withdrew from public life, claiming illness and fatigue. Whispers began to circulate among the townsfolk, curious glances and hushed conversations following her every move. Some speculated about a secret admirer, others whispered of a mysterious illness, but no one dared voice the truth that lingered unspoken in their minds. Elijah, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to maintain his image as a devoted pastor. He preached with even greater fervor, his sermons filled with messages of forgiveness and redemption, a subtle attempt to alleviate his own guilt and quell any suspicions. He made regular visits to Sarah's cottage, always under the cover of darkness, bringing her food, medicine, and words of comfort. When Sarah finally gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, they named her Hope, a symbol of their unwavering belief in a better future. Elijah, though unable to publicly acknowledge his daughter, provided for her and Sarah discreetly, leaving money and supplies on their doorstep under the cloak of night. The townsfolk, though curious about the source of Sarah's newfound wealth, attributed it to the kindness of a generous benefactor, someone touched by her angelic voice and her unfortunate circumstances. Elijah's displays of piety and charity further diverted suspicion, solidifying his image as a man of God, incapable of such a transgression. But the secret weighed heavily on Sarah's soul. She longed to reveal the truth, to introduce hope to the world as Elijah's daughter, to live an honest life, free from the constraints of their deception. However, Elijah remained steadfast in his resolve to protect his reputation, clinging to the lie that had become their prison. The tension between them grew, threatening to unravel the fragile threads that held their secret together. The annual town baptism was a grand affair in Redemption Gulch, a day of spiritual renewal and community celebration. It was a tradition deeply rooted in their faith, a symbolic cleansing of sins and a reaffirmation of their commitment to God. The entire town would gather by the river, dressed in their Sunday best, to witness the ceremony. This year, the anticipation was even greater than usual. Several young couples had recently welcomed new babies into the world, and the baptism would mark their official entry into the church community. The townsfolk looked forward to the joyous occasion, a chance to celebrate new life and reaffirm their shared values. The baptism was typically performed by the town's pastor, and this year, all eyes were on Pastor Elijah. He had quickly become a beloved figure, and his participation in the ceremony was highly anticipated. He prepared meticulously, spending hours studying scripture and praying for guidance, determined to make the event a truly meaningful experience for everyone involved. However, for Sarah, the upcoming baptism filled her with dread. She knew that Elijah would be baptizing baby Hope, and the thought of him holding their child in his arms, publicly proclaiming her faith while concealing his true relationship to her, was almost unbearable. She wrestled with her conscience, torn between her desire to protect Elijah and her yearning to reveal the truth. The secret had become a suffocating weight, and she feared that it would eventually consume her. The upcoming baptism threatened to bring everything crashing down, exposing their lies and shattering the fragile peace of Redemption Gulch. The river, usually a symbol of cleansing and renewal, now seemed like a treacherous current, pulling them closer to the brink of disaster. The day of the baptism dawned bright and clear, the sun shining down on Redemption Gulch with an almost blinding intensity. The townsfolk, dressed in their finest clothes, began to gather by the riverbank, their faces filled with anticipation and excitement. The air buzzed with chatter and laughter as families greeted each other, and children played near the water's edge. Elijah, standing tall and proud, addressed the crowd, his voice resonating with sincerity and conviction. He spoke of the importance of faith, the power of forgiveness, and the promise of eternal life. He announced the names of those who would be baptized, including baby Hope, causing a ripple of unease to run through Sarah. As Elijah spoke, Sarah stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched as he held baby Hope in his arms, his eyes filled with what appeared to be paternal affection. But she knew that beneath the surface, he was consumed by fear, terrified that their secret would be revealed. The weight of her guilt became almost unbearable. She could no longer bear the thought of him baptizing Hope, publicly declaring her faith while denying his own fatherhood. The hypocrisy was too much to bear. She knew that she had to do something to stop the charade before it was too late. A wave of determination washed over her, eclipsing her fear and uncertainty. She made a decision, a desperate gamble that could either save them or destroy them completely. She would reveal the truth, no matter the consequences. She would no longer allow Elijah to control her destiny or to dictate the fate of their child. The time for secrets was over. The time for truth had come. The decision had been brewing for weeks, a tempest raging within her, finally reaching its peak. To fully understand Sarah's resolve, we must rewind to a few days prior, to a heated exchange that solidified her path. Sarah had confronted Elijah in the privacy of her cottage, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Elijah, I can't do this anymore. I can't live with this lie. Hope deserves to know her father, and the town deserves to know the truth." Elijah, his face etched with worry, had pleaded with her. "Sarah, please, you don't understand what you're saying. This will ruin everything. My career, my reputation, our lives." "What about Hope's life?" Sarah retorted, her eyes flashing with defiance. "She deserves more than a secret father, a whispered name in the dark. She deserves to be acknowledged, to be loved openly." Elijah had paced the floor, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "I do love her, Sarah, you know that. But I can't risk everything. The church, they would never understand. I would be ostracized, stripped of my position. And what would become of you and Hope then? We would survive," Sarah had declared, her voice filled with conviction. "We would find a way. But I refuse to live a lie any longer. I want Hope to grow up knowing the truth, not shrouded in secrecy and shame. Elijah had refused to budge, clinging to his fear and his desire to protect himself. "I can't do it, Sarah. I won't. I will provide for you. I will always be there for Hope, but I cannot publicly acknowledge her as my daughter." That was the breaking point. That was the moment Sarah realized that Elijah's love for her and Hope was conditional, overshadowed by his own self-preservation. That was the moment she resolved to take matters into her own hands, to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The baptism was the stage, and the truth was her only weapon. The ceremony began with a hymn, Sarah's voice notably absent from the choir. The music, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a mocking reminder of her deception. As the last notes faded, Elijah stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces of the townsfolk. He held baby Hope cradled in his arms, her tiny face serene and innocent, oblivious to the turmoil that surrounded her. Elijah began to speak, his voice clear and strong, but Sarah noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he held Hope. He spoke of the importance of baptism, of welcoming new life into the fold, of cleansing away sin and embracing God's grace. Each word felt like a dagger twisting in Sarah's heart. He then turned his attention to Hope, his voice softening as he gazed down at her. "And now, we welcome little Hope into our community, a symbol of faith and a promise of a brighter future." He paused, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the crowd. In that fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of fear, a silent plea for her to remain silent. But Sarah could not be silenced. She had come too far, endured too much to back down now. As Elijah prepared to baptize Hope, raising her slightly above the water, Sarah knew that this was her last chance. The moment of truth had arrived. The fate of Redemption Gulch, of Elijah, of Hope, and of herself hung in the balance. The air crackled with anticipation, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of the river against the bank. Everything was poised on a knife's edge, ready to shatter with the force of a revelation. A hush fell over the crowd as Elijah, his voice trembling slightly, began the baptismal prayer. "Dear Lord," he intoned, "we ask you to bless this child, Hope, and cleanse her of all sin. Guide her steps along the path of righteousness, and grant her a life filled with your grace." He dipped his hand into the water, the droplets glistening in the sunlight. He raised his hand again, preparing to sprinkle the water over Hope's head. But before he could, a piercing cry shattered the silence. "Stop!" Sarah's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the air like a thunderclap. All eyes turned to her, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and disbelief. Elijah froze, his hand still raised, his eyes wide with terror. Sarah stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Elijah, her voice filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "I can't let you do this, Elijah. I can't let you baptize our daughter under a lie." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The murmurs began, growing louder with each passing second. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the storm that was about to erupt. "Elijah is Hope's father," she declared, her voice echoing across the riverbank. "He is the father of my child." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whimpering of baby Hope, who seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The truth had been revealed, the secret exposed. The fragile piece of Redemption Gulch was about to be shattered, leaving behind a wreckage of broken trust and shattered dreams. The baptismal waters, meant for cleansing, now reflected the chaos and turmoil that had engulfed their community. The revelation landed like a bomb, scattering shockwaves of disbelief and outrage throughout the crowd. The initial silence shattered into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and angry shouts. Faces contorted with a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and moral indignation. The God-fearing townsfolk of Redemption Gulch, so accustomed to order and piety, were suddenly thrown into a maelstrom of scandal and uncertainty. Accusations flew, directed at both Sarah and Elijah. Some called Sarah a harlot, a temptress who had seduced their beloved pastor. Others accused Elijah of hypocrisy, of betraying his sacred vows and deceiving his congregation. The unity that had once defined Redemption Gulch crumbled before their eyes, replaced by a bitter division that threatened to tear the community apart. The women, many of whom had admired Sarah's singing and envied her beauty, now glared at her with scorn and resentment. The men, who had respected Elijah's leadership and guidance, now questioned his integrity and moral character. The children, sensing the tension and anger, clung to their parents, their innocent eyes wide with fear and confusion. The baptismal ceremony, once a symbol of hope and renewal, was now a scene of chaos and recrimination. The river, once a source of spiritual cleansing, now reflected the ugliness and bitterness that had consumed their hearts. Elijah stood frozen, his face pale and stricken, hope still cradled in his arms. He looked from Sarah to the crowd, his eyes pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. But there was no mercy to be found in those angry faces, only judgment and condemnation. The secret he had guarded so fiercely had finally been exposed, and the consequences were about to unfold, threatening to destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. For a moment, Elijah stood paralyzed, the weight of Sarah's accusation crushing him. He looked at the faces in the crowd, once filled with admiration and respect, now contorted with anger and disgust. He knew that his carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the flawed and fallible man beneath. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny Sarah's claims, to salvage what remained of his reputation. But the words caught in his throat, choked by guilt and shame. He glanced at Sarah, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and defiance, and he knew that she had spoken the truth. He looked down at Hope, her innocent face a stark reminder of his betrayal. How could he deny her, his own flesh and blood, in front of the entire town? How could he perpetuate the lie that had caused so much pain and suffering? He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and made a decision. He would not deny the truth, no matter the consequences. He would face the music, accept responsibility for his actions, and beg for forgiveness. He opened his eyes, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "It's true," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am Hope's father." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The murmurs grew louder, more intense. Some gasped in shock, others shook their heads in disbelief, and still others erupted in cries of outrage. Elijah continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I have sinned. I have betrayed your trust. I have broken my vows. I am not the man you thought I was." He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I am so sorry for the pain I have caused you. You deserved better than this." His confession, though painful and humiliating, brought a sense of relief, a release from the burden of his secret. The truth was out, and now he could finally begin to atone for his sins. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, but he was determined to walk it, for the sake of Sarah, for the sake of Hope, and for the sake of his own soul. The shock and outrage continued to ripple through the crowd, but amidst the angry murmurs, a voice of reason emerged. Martha, an elderly woman respected for her wisdom and unwavering faith, stepped forward. Her face, etched with wrinkles that spoke of a life well lived, radiated compassion and understanding. "Enough," she declared, her voice clear and firm, silencing the angry shouts. "We have heard enough accusations and condemnations. It is time for compassion and understanding." She approached Sarah, her eyes filled with kindness. "Sarah, my dear, you have shown great courage in revealing this truth. I know this must have been difficult for you." She then turned to Elijah, her gaze stern but not unforgiving. "Elijah, you have made a grave mistake, but you have also confessed your sin. Now, you must face the consequences and seek redemption." Martha addressed the crowd, her voice filled with conviction. "We are all sinners in the eyes of God. We have all made mistakes, and we have all fallen short of His grace. It is not our place to judge, but to forgive, to offer compassion and support to those who have stumbled." She reminded them of the teachings of Jesus, of the importance of forgiveness and second chances. She urged them to remember that Redemption Gulch was built on hope and faith, and that they should not abandon those principles in a moment of anger and outrage. "Let us not allow this scandal to divide us," she pleaded. "Let us instead use it as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to strengthen our community. Let us show the world that Redemption Gulch is a place where forgiveness and redemption are always possible." Martha's words hung in the air, a beacon of hope in the darkness of their despair. The crowd, initially consumed by anger and judgment, began to quiet, listening to her wisdom and reflecting on her message of compassion. The tide was beginning to turn. Emboldened by Martha's words and the softening of the crowd's anger, Sarah stepped forward, her voice still trembling slightly, but filled with a newfound resolve. She knew that she had to explain her actions, to share her perspective, to help the town understand the circumstances that had led to this moment. She spoke of her past trauma, the secret she had carried for so long, the pain that had driven her to seek solace in Redemption Gulch. She spoke of her initial admiration for Elijah, his kindness, and his genuine concern for her well-being. She spoke of their growing connection, their shared vulnerabilities, and the forbidden love that had blossomed between them. She explained that she had never intended to cause harm or to betray the trust of the community. She had only wanted to find love and happiness, to build a life for herself and her child. She acknowledged that she had made mistakes, that she had succumbed to temptation, but she also emphasized Elijah's initial support and his subsequent fear-driven secrecy. She explained how Elijah had initially promised to stand by her, but as her pregnancy progressed, his fear of exposure had grown, leading him to insist on keeping their relationship a secret. She spoke of the burden of that secret, the guilt and shame that had weighed heavily on her soul. She emphasized that she had only revealed the truth because she could no longer bear the hypocrisy, the deceit, and the denial of Hope's rightful place in their community. She wanted Hope to grow up knowing her father, to be loved and accepted for who she was, not hidden away in the shadows. She pleaded with the town to understand her motives, to see the human frailty behind her actions, and to offer her, Elijah, a chance at redemption. Her heartfelt words, filled with honesty and vulnerability, resonated with many in the crowd, evoking sympathy and understanding. The tide was turning in their favor, but the battle for forgiveness was far from over. Moved by Sarah's heartfelt plea and Martha's wise counsel, Elijah stepped forward, his head bowed in shame. He knew that he had to speak, to offer his own account of the events, to take full responsibility for his actions. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with remorse. "Sarah is right," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I did love her, and I did promise to stand by her. But fear consumed me. Fear of losing my position, fear of disappointing the community, fear of facing the consequences of my actions." He confessed that he had allowed his fear to dictate his decisions, leading him down a path of deception and betrayal. He acknowledged that he had prioritized his own self-preservation over the well-being of Sarah and Hope. He turned to the crowd, his voice filled with genuine sorrow. "I have failed you all. I have broken your trust. I have abused my position. I am not worthy to be your pastor." He begged for their forgiveness, not for himself, but for Sarah and Hope, who had suffered the most from his actions. He vowed to spend the rest of his life atoning for his sins, dedicating himself to raising hope and earning back the trust of the community. He knelt before Sarah, taking her hand in his. "Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise to do everything in my power to make amends." He looked at Hope, his eyes filled with love and longing. "And Hope," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I promise to be the father you deserve. I will always be there for you, to love you, to guide you, and to protect you." His confession, though painful and humiliating, was a turning point. The crowd, witnessing his genuine remorse and his unwavering commitment to Sarah and Hope, began to soften their stance. The seeds of forgiveness had been planted, and now it was up to them to nurture them and allow them to grow. Despite the growing sentiment of forgiveness, the town remained divided. Some, deeply wounded by Elijah's betrayal, demanded his immediate expulsion. They argued that he had violated his sacred vows, abused his position of power, and brought shame upon their community. They insisted that he could no longer be trusted to lead them, and that he should be banished from Redemption Gulch. Others, influenced by Martha's wisdom and Sarah's vulnerability, advocated for forgiveness and redemption. They believed that everyone deserved a second chance, and that Elijah's genuine remorse and his commitment to Sarah and Hope should be taken into consideration. They argued that banishing him would not solve anything, but would only create more bitterness and division. The debate raged on, with impassioned arguments and heartfelt pleas on both sides. The community, once united in their faith and their values, was now fractured, torn between judgment and compassion. The future of Redemption Gulch hung in the balance, dependent on their ability to overcome their anger and find a path to reconciliation. Even within families, opinions differed, creating tension and discord. Husbands argued with wives, parents clashed with children, and friends turned against friends. The scandal had exposed the fault lines within their community, revealing the deep-seated prejudices and the conflicting beliefs that simmered beneath the surface of their seemingly harmonious existence. The weight of the decision, whether to condemn or to forgive, rested heavily on their shoulders, threatening to crush them under its immense pressure. The baptismal waters, once a symbol of cleansing and renewal, now reflected the uncertainty and division that had engulfed their lives. In the midst of the turmoil, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. Stepping forward, she addressed the crowd with a newfound strength and clarity. "I have heard your arguments, your anger, and your pain, and I understand. But I ask you, not for Elijah's sake, but for Hope's sake, to consider forgiveness." She looked at Elijah, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of love, anger, and compassion. Elijah has made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he has also confessed his sins and vowed to make amends. He may not be the pastor you thought he was, but he is Hope's father, and she deserves to have him in her life. She turned back to the crowd, her voice filled with emotion. "I know that many of you feel betrayed, and you have every right to feel that way. But holding on to anger and resentment will only poison our community. It will not bring back the past, and it will not heal our wounds." She emphasized the importance of Hope having a father, of growing up in a loving and supportive environment. She argued that banishing Elijah would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and suffering, while offering him a chance at redemption could bring healing and restoration. "I forgive Elijah," she declared, her voice ringing with sincerity. "Not because he deserves it, but because I choose to. Because I believe in the power of forgiveness. And because I want Hope to grow up in a world where forgiveness is always possible." Her words, spoken with such conviction and compassion, had a profound impact on the crowd. Many, who had been wavering in their stance, were now swayed by her example. The seeds of forgiveness, planted by Martha and nurtured by Sarah's words, were beginning to sprout, promising a harvest of healing and reconciliation. The battle for Redemption Gulch's soul was far from over, but Sarah's act of forgiveness had shifted the momentum, offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness of their despair. Understanding the deep divisions within the community and the need for a symbolic gesture of humility, Elijah made a difficult decision. He stepped forward, his voice filled with resignation and resolve. "I have heard your words, Sarah, and I am grateful for your forgiveness. But I also understand that I can no longer serve as your pastor." He announced his resignation, acknowledging that his actions had irreparably damaged his credibility and undermined his ability to lead the congregation. He explained that he could not, in good conscience, continue to hold a position of authority when he had so deeply violated the trust of the community. He vowed to remain in Redemption Gulch, not as their pastor, but as a father to Hope and as a member of the community. He committed to atoning for his sins, dedicating himself to raising Hope and earning back the trust of those he had wronged. He expressed his hope that one day he would be able to regain their respect and be welcomed back into their fold, not as a leader, but as a fellow member of the community. He understood that this would be a long and arduous process, but he was willing to do whatever it took to make amends. His decision, though painful and humbling, was met with a mixture of relief and respect. Those who had demanded his expulsion recognized the sincerity of his remorse and the depth of his commitment to Sarah and Hope. Those who had advocated for forgiveness saw his resignation as a necessary step towards healing and reconciliation. The path forward was still uncertain, but Elijah's decision had cleared the way for a new chapter in Redemption Gulch, one marked by forgiveness, humility, and the possibility of redemption. The community, though still fractured, had taken a significant step towards healing and rebuilding their shattered trust. The baptismal waters, once reflecting chaos and division, now shimmered with a faint glimmer of hope. The following months were a period of healing and rebuilding for Redemption Gulch. A new pastor arrived, a kind and understanding man who focused on mending the fractured community and preaching messages of forgiveness and reconciliation. He worked tirelessly to bridge the divides, encouraging open communication and fostering a spirit of unity. Elijah, true to his word, remained in Redemption Gulch. He took on odd jobs, working as a carpenter and a handyman, humbly serving the community he had once led. He dedicated his life to raising Hope, showering her with love and attention, and proving himself to be a devoted and caring father. Sarah, with her beautiful voice and her compassionate heart, continued to be a source of strength and inspiration for the town. She used her music to heal wounds and to spread messages of hope and forgiveness. She and Elijah, though their relationship remained complex and challenging, worked together to create a loving and stable home for Hope. Slowly but surely, the wounds began to heal. The anger and resentment began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of understanding and compassion. The townsfolk of Redemption Gulch, though scarred by the past, emerged from the scandal stronger and more resilient than before. They had learned a valuable lesson about human fallibility, about the importance of forgiveness, and about the power of second chances. They had discovered that even in the darkest of times, hope could still prevail, and that redemption was always possible. Redemption Gulch was a town reborn, forged in the fires of scandal and betrayal, but tempered by the waters of forgiveness and reconciliation. The river, once a symbol of chaos and division, now flowed peacefully, reflecting the newfound serenity and unity of their community. Years passed. Hope grew into a bright and spirited young girl, loved and cherished by both Sarah and Elijah. She knew the story of her birth, the scandal that had rocked Redemption Gulch, and the journey of forgiveness that had followed. But she also knew that she was loved unconditionally and that her parents had made mistakes, but had ultimately chosen to do what was right. Elijah, through his unwavering dedication to hope and his humble service to the community, gradually earned back the trust and respect of the townsfolk. He never sought to reclaim his position as pastor, content to live a simple life, focused on his family and his faith. Sarah continued to sing in the church choir, her voice even more powerful and moving than before, filled with the wisdom and compassion she had gained through her experiences. She and Elijah never married, but their bond remained strong, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the waters of forgiveness. One sunny afternoon, as Hope played by the riverbank, Elijah and Sarah sat together on the porch of their small cottage, watching her with pride and contentment. The river flowed peacefully, reflecting the clear blue sky and the serene landscape. "We made it," Sarah said, her voice filled with gratitude. "We survived the storm." Elijah smiled, taking her hand in his. "We did," he said, "and we emerged stronger than before." They knew that their lives would never be perfect, that the scars of the past would always remain. But they had learned to embrace their imperfections, to forgive themselves and each other, and to find joy in the simple blessings of life. Redemption Gulch, once a town divided by scandal and betrayal, had become a testament to the power of forgiveness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring promise of redemption. The circle was complete, and so Redemption Gulch lived up to its name. It wasn't a perfect place, and the scars of the past were a reminder of human frailty. But it was a place where people believed in second chances, where forgiveness was valued, and where hope could always bloom, even in the harshest of environments. The tale of the pastor, the singer, and their child became a legend in Redemption Gulch, a story told and retold through generations, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and redemption. It served as a reminder that even the most devastating mistakes could be overcome, that even the most fractured communities could be healed, and that even in the Wild West, where justice was often swift and unforgiving, grace and compassion could prevail. The river continued to flow, its waters cleansing and renewing, a constant reminder of the promise of a fresh start. The church bells rang out every Sunday, their melodies echoing through the valley, celebrating the enduring spirit of Redemption Gulch. And Sarah's voice, soaring through the air, carried a message of hope to all who would listen, a message that even in the darkest of times, redemption is always possible. The sun set on Redemption Gulch, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the faint echo of a song. And in the heart of the town, a family, scarred by the past, but united by love, looked towards the future, knowing that even in the Wild West, redemption could be found. Their journey, though difficult and arduous, had led them to a place of peace, forgiveness, and enduring love. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.